came from a pretty humble background, like my family was very poor. I think we were living on, welfare and food stamps when I was young. So we didn't have a lot of the advantages that a lot of people do growing up.
And we're live. I'm super excited today to have Luke on the podcast, Unfiltered, today. Here's a quick background on Luke. He'd been a systems architect for about 10 years, most recently at AWS, if I'm correct. He built the entire staking product at Coinbase, and most recently, he's raised over $10 million at a $100 million valuation for his lending protocol, Moonwell. In my opinion, Luke is the belle of the ball for the Polkadot ecosystem, and in many ways, he gives me hope for the DAP ecosystem, because with Luke around, there's always a seasoned vet in the room. And on a personal note, I consider Luke to be a close friend, and we've connected on a number of subjects that vary all the way from conversations about the Wim Hof method, cold water immersion benefits, and psychedelics. So I'm super thrilled to have Luke on Unfiltered with Munjal.
Hey, this is Munjal here. As a founder's coach, I love to help entrepreneurs unleash their full potential by discovering and conquering their blind spots. If you're interested in accelerating your success, check out my website for more resources. Thanks.
It's great to be here, Munjal. Thanks for inviting me.
Sure, man. How'd that intro go? Did you say I missed anything?
It's pretty good. There's a couple details off, I think, but I think it's fine. I've actually been in systems engineering for a couple decades now and worked at AWS for 3 years prior to working at Coinbase for 3 years, and then started my own thing about a year ago.
Nice. Very cool. Very cool. I like to highlight the founder journey here, right? So one of my questions to begin with is, after having worked as a systems architect for 20 years, two questions. One, what made you interested in jumping into crypto / Coinbase as a whole? And then secondarily, what made you take the jump from there to launching something on your own? Because most often people tend to believe that, that entrepreneur, doing the entrepreneurial route after working for 20 years isn't the most conventional route, right? So those are just two quick questions I wanted to kick it off with.
Sure. Well, to start, let me go back to the .com boom, a couple decades ago. That was really when I started my career. And I was working as a network engineer at a medium-sized internet service provider. And the cool thing about that was just the fact that I got exposure to every type of internet service you could imagine in the very early days of the internet. So I realized, because I helped a lot of customers with their internet presence, that I could basically build the full stack for a .com startup, right? I could build web servers, DNS, all of the infrastructure required to basically launch a large web property, and learn some really good skills in my early career. And in the 2000s, I saw my friends begin to use Amazon Cloud, AWS, in 2009, 2010. And that was really in the early days of crypto as well. So crypto, Bitcoin started right after the financial crisis in 2009, the Satoshi white paper. I actually started mining crypto just as a hobby on my gaming computer back in the 2010s, in the very early days. I would leave my computer running when I was at work or when I was asleep at night and just let it mine Bitcoin. And to me, it was just a cool hobby. And it was really interesting because it was like this internet money, this magic internet money that you could print on your computer. And I could print about 50 cents worth of Bitcoin every day. I think Bitcoin is worth $1 when I first started mining it. And it was really interesting and just kind of a fascinating hobby to me, but I never made a career out of it. I would go to my day job as a systems engineer, systems architect, and then come home, play video games, and leave my computer running at night and printing magic internet money. I saw my friends getting really into public cloud. I was working at this large healthcare company at the time, and I really wanted to use public cloud because I could see it was like the future. Like Amazon Cloud was amazing. You could spin up servers and get them in seconds, minutes, instead of hours or days. And I could see it was the future. I wanted to do it, but I was working at a healthcare company that wouldn't let me use cloud. So that kind of brought me to Amazon around 2015, I think. So that was when I ended up working full-time at Amazon as a solutions architect. and helped a lot of large companies like Apple and others kind of design their entire cloud backend. I was working on strategic accounts with strategic customers like Apple, helping them design, for example, the backend to iCloud, which is mostly S3 storage, if you're familiar with that storage service. And it was a really fascinating experience, obviously, like getting to work with some of the biggest companies in the world, helping to solve like scaling challenges that are pretty hard to solve. I think at the time, something like 28 million requests per second for books, movies, TV shows, music, everything you can imagine on iCloud are routed to like mostly Ireland, because that's a tax-free jurisdiction for digital asset sale or digital sales of media. And so you can imagine some of the scaling problems that we were solving. It was really a fun time.
That is a really unique position to be in, because in Web3, we're always talking about scaling solutions, finding the most number of transactions you can do per second. But that's kind of child's play compared to what you were doing in terms of scaling at Amazon. And that also seemed to be your first job in cloud infrastructure, right? So you went like right into it. It's almost like a boot camp straight into dealing with scaling solutions, right?
That's right. Yeah. And, went from working for a pretty large healthcare company and just solving like relatively smaller scale problems to solving some of the biggest scaling challenges in the world. Now, granted, it's a totally different architecture than Web3, right? It's not decentralized. It's very centralized. It's very Web2. But the scaling problems are still really hard. And a lot of that background, will help me even today in new projects and initiatives I work on now.
Definitely.
But it's been a lot of fun.
Yeah, no, totally. That's super cool. How were you guys learning? Were you kind of just, at the time, did you have examples that you could learn from, since you were essentially on the bleeding edge of scaling from a Web2 perspective?
So one of the things I really loved the most about working at Amazon is the fact that Amazon invests really heavily in their employees, and they have a principle around continuous learning. So it's something that I think all of us that are really, interested in deep in technology have to constantly be learning new skills and new things. It's just the reality of working in tech is that you're constantly learning a new framework, a new, whatever the case may be, a new technology, a new cloud service. And so you kind of have to constantly be learning. And Amazon would let me take as many classes as I wanted, like instructor-led classes, labs. I think in the first 3 months that I was there, I was able to take 10 or 12 weeks of solid training. It was just an incredible amount of training, and it was just all free. And my manager would just let me take whatever courses I wanted. So that was really excellent way to kind of ramp up on cloud skills in general. I think I got half a dozen AWS certifications, but that doesn't necessarily prepare you for some of those large scale solutions designs and some of the hard problems you have to solve. And to be honest, I can't solve them myself either. There's an entire team of 20 engineers at iCloud that I collaborated with pretty closely. And so we try new things like, how do we configure the proxy fleet to handle 28 million requests per second? What are the types of instances we want to use? What type of storage do we want to use behind them? What type of network interfaces do we use? How do we use BGP to route traffic appropriately to all the various, content distribution network points of presence? And all of these things, you just kind of dig into the problem space and you use your years of experience in solving smaller scale problems to sort of divide the problem into smaller pieces that you can actually handle. So I think that's a common problem that everyone faces in engineering and tech, is that you have to take a problem that seems insurmountable and then divide it into smaller pieces until you get to a piece that you can actually solve yourself or with a small team of people, and solve that. And then you work your way back up to solving the bigger problem.
That makes sense. This question just kind of floated in my brain right now. You said you're working in healthcare, right? I'm assuming that you probably spent one too many years in healthcare before you finally jumped into AWS. What was kind of the impetus that helped you make that jump at the time, right? Because I'm sure you had a pretty comfy job at the time. So what really Yeah, what was the impetus?
That's a great question. So when I was working in healthcare, I worked at McKesson, which is like their headquarters is in San Francisco, on Post Street. I think they've been there for 180 years or something. So it's incredible, big company. It's been around forever. But the interesting thing there is like I started as just a systems engineer and worked my way up to like a director level where I was doing architecture, and I built this very large internal private cloud at McKesson, where we were running, we had like an 8-figure annual budget, and we were running, hundreds of thousands of virtual machines across West Coast, East Coast, US, Canada, and Europe. And it was a very successful deployment. And I really wanted to do more in that space. I spent about a decade there. And so I really wanted to do more, but because McKesson has a direct to consumer medical distribution business that competes directly with Amazon, we had a no Amazon policy. And so that made it really hard because I could tell that the future of the entire tech industry was going towards Amazon. All of the startups were using it. And eventually all the big companies in the world would use it. And kind of that story has really played out. We've kind of seen that. And I wanted to be where, in technology, I always kind of want to be learning something new and learning the technology that the best companies in the world are using. So that's why I, kind of pulled myself out of that comfort zone. And it was like, I need to go look for opportunities at Amazon. If I want to, I just wanted to use AWS as a customer, but then I thought, maybe I should just work there, go work for the cloud, instead of just being a customer of the cloud. And that kind of drew me to there.
That's cool. When you joined Amazon, what was the initial role that you were hired under? Because you started at a director level, right? Did you take like almost a step back in terms of your title, or was it pretty comparable in terms of the role you took on?
It was pretty comparable. So they brought me in as a principal engineer, which is a pretty high level. It's like a level 7 in Amazon, in as far as an individual contributor goes. So it was a comparable level. As a principal engineer, you're sort of expected to be, basically like you could be the tech lead for an entire company, where you could kind of design the architecture for an entire large startup, or, come in and solve like really hard problems. So it was pretty much a lateral move for me, but it opened up the opportunity for me. And again, like one of the interesting things, like looking back on my early experiences working for an internet provider and learning kind of how to build the entire stack for a .com startup, this sort of took it to the next level where I realized I could, sort of learn how to build the entire technology stack for like a large company and do that myself, build most of the components for it. And this also, I think, is a good path to gaining confidence to start your own company, because once you realize that like, hey, I can do this, I can build web servers, I can build DNS, I can build, mail servers, I can build all of the components, I can build, container workload orchestration systems, and like all of these things that you need to build to like properly deliver software to people over the web or mobile. Once you start to realize you can build that all yourself, then the sky's the limit, and that sort of gives you the confidence to kind of start your own thing. And so while I was still working at Amazon, maybe this is a good segue, I actually started a side business called Blockscale. My brother and I, who's also a software engineer, we started a side business where we were doing crypto hobby work. Like we were initially just hacking on Saturday mornings together on, like DApps and things like that back in 2016, 2017. And so we started hacking, on just weekends. Yeah. This is like the DAP era of like the ICO era of 2016, 2017.
2017 is when the ICO era really hit. In 2016, it was, it was super, it was like bleeding edge in 2016. I think, pretty sure Ethereum only like was funded in 2015. I think 2014, 2015, 2016, you were building dApps. What were you building back then?
So we had this idea for a DAP that we wanted to build. And we actually wanted to build a decentralized marketplace for airline rewards, like hotel rewards and other types of points and miles. So you could imagine like the idea we had was that what if people could basically take like their Delta Sky miles and swap them for United miles, or swap different hotels reward points with each other in a decentralized way. And so that was our initial idea. We just started hacking on this idea of like kind of creating a decentralized exchange for reward points and miles. Now we never actually built that thing
Oh, positive.
because
Like literally, I was just booking some flights, right, for this cold immersion training I'm doing in Poland. And my friend pointed out to me that my Chase rewards, right, they give you 1.5x the number of points you get if you spend it on travel. But if you transfer them to United, you actually get 3 times the number of points if you use it through your United rewards. So like there's totally an opportunity there for arbitrage. So like, I mean, this is just something I realized like in the last couple of days, but you clearly caught on to it a little earlier than that. That's cool.
Yeah, and I think the reason why we never actually built that out is because as we started to get into the implementation of it, we realized we could build the exchange relatively easily. You know, it would look something like Uniswap V1, but the challenge was really you have to have some type of integration with all of these different airlines and hotels, and they probably don't want to support, you know, a decentralized marketplace for their points. They want to make it as hard as possible to kind of like transfer them between people.
Inclusivity, yeah. Keep a mode very Web 2 oriented. That makes complete sense.
Yeah, but the interesting opportunity that came our way while we were both hacking on side projects on the weekends was, you know, my brother Carl, he knew the president of the Tezos Foundation at the time, and this is in early 2018. And you know, we'd been hacking for like, you know, just kind of a year, maybe off and on the weekends, not really building anything that was too impressive, but just learning and, you know, kind of tossing around this idea of the reward point exchange. But the president of the Tezos Foundation approached my brother and he said, I think this was like February or March 2018. He said, you know, we've committed to the community that we would launch the network by the first half of 2018, which was June 30th. And that's the deadline we have to launch the network. And we have zero infrastructure. We don't have any data centers. And the Tezos Foundation would be running the initial validators. You know, if you're familiar with proof of stake, like Ethereum, you have to run a validator if you want to participate. So the first 6 weeks of the network, the only validators that would be running would be Tezos Foundation owned validators. And they realized that they needed some cloud infrastructure to build those on. So they approached us with this consulting project. They were like, you know, we need some help. We need an AWS expert. And of course, Carl, my brother, was just like, told them, you know, hey, Luke is working at AWS. He can probably help. We actually flew to Paris. The two of us met with the team and kind of showed them some of the work I had done. For example, I had already done some kind of side project hobby work for a large crypto wallet called MyCrypto. I don't know if you're familiar with them. They were an Ethereum wallet in the early days. They still are. MyCrypto and MyEther wallet was the original name of their wallet.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, and so I had basically built like node infrastructure for them back in 2017 when their nodes were on fire because of all the ICOs that were happening every day, right? You know, what would happen is someone would have a crazy ICO and like all of their nodes would go down, their wallet would be non-functional. So they needed my help to kind of build more reliable node backend.
And on top of that, when the nodes go down, because I worked at Alchemy, I don't know if many people have run their own node infrastructure. It's, pardon my French, but it's a bitch to restart those Ethereum nodes. It essentially has to resync all the transactions, right? The second one node goes down. So that was a big problem to solve. Yeah,
it's actually a very hard problem to solve. And that's cool that you worked at Alchemy. I didn't know. I know the founding team there. They're great guys. Yeah, it is a hard problem to solve. And every wallet, you know, MetaMask uses Infura, for example, because they're both owned by Consensus.
Right.
But every wallet kind of has this challenge where if you don't talk to reliable nodes, then it becomes unusable at certain times, especially when the network is, you know, really busy, which is exactly the wrong time for your wallet to not work, because that's when people want to use their wallets. You know, maybe it's like an NFT mint is happening. You really want to use your wallet for that 5 minutes that the NFT mint is happening. And yet you can't because the nodes are down. So that was a problem we had solved. And basically we flew to Paris and we shared our solution with them. And we said, look, we know how to run very reliable nodes. We've done this before last year for one of the leading crypto wallets, and we can build your validator infrastructure for you in AWS. And they had really hard security requirements. For example, the validators need a private key to sign staking messages. And those private keys, you could just run them or leave them on the server itself, right? Store them in a file somewhere, but that'd be insecure. It's kind of like not using a ledger or hardware wallet. right? And these keys are securing, hundreds of millions of dollars. So it's a pretty high security environment. It needs the best security in the world. So we built some really interesting technology, which is basically a remote signing solution, so that you can imagine like a validator here, and then you can run like a signing server, a secure signing server in a completely different AWS account. And so when the validator itself needs to get a signature, it can talk through some cross-account networking and get a signature from this remote signer that is attached to a hardware security module. And that way, if the validator over here gets hacked, you can't actually generate any, or you can't transfer funds, you can't steal money, you can't steal the private key. All you can do is maybe take down the validator. And then the system that actually signs these messages is in a completely separate account that nobody has access to. So
having like a stash account and a control account in Polkadot.js wallets, right? But probably a lot more complex. That's just my analogy.
Yeah, and so this remote signing tech, I don't believe anyone had built this before us. And so this was sort of a requirement. And I think we came up with a really creative solution that kind of leveraged some of my cloud background, cloud experience, and the crypto experience we had gained over the last few years, my brother and I hacking together on side projects.
It's a great kind of marriage with your like hobbies. Like I've always believed that when I'm working a job like that gets kind of monotonous and boring, like my hobbies are kind of what gets me like really excited. And so then like I end up pivoting that hobby somehow into a job. That's kind of how I got into crypto myself, right? So it was a really cool, I don't know, like twist of fate, right? That you'd already done this and that's what you were getting called in for. And it's, because part of my passion is, I don't mean to interrupt your flow there, but because part of my passion here is to like demonstrate the importance of hobbies, from like my coaching lens, especially for people working out of India, right? In India, there's often this huge focus on do your job, do your career, focus 100% in that. And like, there's no time for hobbies, right? But in reality, the hobbies, the fun time, the play time, when you're just being creative and kind of building and breaking things, that's kind of where like the alpha lies in, right? For like where the maximum career growth can actually come from. So like this is like a perfect example of that.
Yeah, I think that's really insightful. Honestly, the thing that I think has led me to be successful is to find something that I'm good at, which just happens to be like, engineering and tech, and then combine that with the hobby of something that you're really passionate about, which is crypto. And then, the combination of those two things, you can really go far. So if you find something that you have a unique skill set, maybe it's like economics or something, you're a brilliant economist, and then you have like a crypto hobby background. Well, it just so happens that a lot of crypto projects actually need really strong economists on their team to help them manage like financial risk, right? So you can leverage your economics background along with your crypto hobbyist knowledge, and you can actually be, maybe 2 or 3x your salary in a short amount of time, versus just an economist that just comes to work 9 to 5 and has no interest outside of work, right?
I completely agree, because like this is one of the problems that I'm very curious about figuring out, right? Literally, you have a bridge behind you, right? And like, I want to build that bridge between India's ecosystem and kind of, which oftentimes is very like, it's a little focused on perfectionism, right? Versus the West, where we kind of have a little more flexibility to build and break things. And there's 1 million developers that graduate out of India every year. But a lot of those developers, once they finish their undergrad or master's, they go right back home to their like farmhouse, right, on their farmland with their families, and they might end up taking like a comfy, cushy job. So like that, there's so much potential there in India that I want to find a way to build that bridge. And like hearing it from you in terms of your actual experience, where the rubber hit the road, that this is like invaluable. So thanks. This is great.
Yeah, no worries. So just to kind of continue the story, we helped the Tezos Foundation launch their network. They launched right on June 30th, so the last day of the deadline. It was a highly successful launch, and we were there launching it alongside the dev team in Paris. And what was really funny was, I think after the launch, or maybe it was a couple of days leading up prior to the launch, remember asking one of the developers on their team, who's going to run this thing after we're done, building it for you. And they said, oh, well, you are, obviously, because we don't have any like DevOps people on our team. And so would you run it for us? And I had no idea I was setting myself up for that. I thought it was just like a 3 to 6 month consulting project that we're doing in our nights and weekends, like while we still had day jobs, right? So anyways, I ended up, kind of operating the validators for them on an ongoing basis. And I did operate them for several years up until just the end of 2021. I transitioned that over to the Tezos, or back to, a resource of the Tezos Foundation, because they wanted to move it in-house. But it was a really great experience, and it actually helped me. That was like my first company that I basically built, that LLC that we just spun up for consulting work as a 2-person, startup. My brother and I became, this vehicle that we used to, basically operate the Tezos Foundation validators for a few years. That also brought me to Coinbase, because when Coinbase wanted to get into the staking business, they have a product you're probably familiar with called Staking Rewards, where you can just hold your crypto on Coinbase, like your Ethereum or your Tezos or Cosmos Atoms, what have you, and you earn, staking reward for holding your crypto on Coinbase, and they stake it for you. So Coinbase wanted to get into this line of business, and they reached out to Tezos Foundation. They were one of the early proof of stake networks, and asked Arthur and Kathleen, the founders, do you know anyone that's good in this space? And they recommended me. So my brother and I, we, flew to San Francisco. I was actually living in the Bay Area at the time. My brother flew in, but we went to Coinbase headquarters.
In France?
What's that?
Was he in France at the time, your brother?
No, my brother was he lives in Utah. So he was in Utah at the time. I was in the Bay Area. I live in East Bay. And we both went into Coinbase headquarters. He flew in, I drove in. But we, like a week later, after Coinbase reached out, we were both at Coinbase headquarters meeting Balaji and, talking about what it would take for us to sell our business to them. And it was kind of funny, because I remember joking, like, after we launched the network, my brother and I were kind of talking about, like, what do we want to do next? And I was joking, I was like, it wouldn't be a bad thing if Coinbase came along and offered us $10 million to buy our business from us, or something like that, right? It was just kind of a fantasy we had, right? That, oh, well, we built this thing, maybe Coinbase will buy it from us. And then it actually happened later that year. Coinbase approached us and it was very interested.
Willed your visualization into existence. That's incredible.
Yeah. And so I think the message really for all your listeners is just that if you can combine a hobby you have, like for me, it was just, I was running crypto, Bitcoin miners and, Ethereum miners at home before I even did it professionally, right? Just as a hobby. You can combine a hobby you have with a skill or a job experience that you have, like, being a software engineer or being a systems engineer or cloud architect or whatever you want. You can combine those two things, and you can, build a company that actually can become the world's leading expert in a specific niche and that's really what you want to do, is that specialization, right? Because Coinbase realized that, my brother and I had knowledge and intellectual property that was probably, only a few people in the world had at the time, right? And so you can be in that role where you're highly desirable at the right time, in a hot new area. And I think there's many opportunities like that in crypto today and in just tech in general, right? Like, I think right at this moment in time, with all the hype around ChatGPT, there's this new job opportunity called prompt engineer, right? If you can write prompts for GPT and other question answer systems and other like knowledge systems that help companies solve problems, you're actually worth quite a bit. And I heard the first prompt engineer that was hired, I can't remember which company it was, he's making $300K a year or something like that. It's a very good salary for just, typing in prompts to an AI, right? So,
what's the goal for that? Is the goal to train the AI to break it, to kind of make it more intelligent? What requires an engineering background to do that?
So this specific prompt engineer is actually a data scientist, and he has the background already as a data scientist. So he's using pandas and Python and all of the data science tooling. And I think what he did is he realized, hey, I can, so if you've ever done any data science before, you probably know that it's really hard to take unstructured data and, write SQL queries across it, right? But that's kind of what everyone wants to do, is take all this data in and write SQL queries on it. And he figured out he could basically give ChatGPT, a sample of data and say, help me write, help me write a schema for this data. And ChatGPT will spit out a bunch of SQL that you could basically directly use to start, doing machine learning on that data and doing analytics on that data. And so there is actually probably a pretty awesome, sort of 10x developer role where you're not only know software engineering or data science, but you also know how to ask the right questions of GPT and other similar systems, so that you can do things a lot faster than other developers can, right? Like the poor guy that's writing his schema by hand for his data set is going to be at a huge disadvantage versus this guy that can just type in a few sentences and get it done in minutes, right?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, ChatGPT is fascinating. At first, I gotta admit, I didn't understand. I'd heard about the power of AI, but like to actually see it up front. And ChatGPT also isn't this, from what I hear, the most powerful AI out there. It's just the most publicly available one. So I feel like that's a conversation for another day, of like just the depth that we can go into around like what the future could look like around that. So I may invite you to come back on here to talk about that another time.
Sure.
So just sticking back on your path. So you then went to work for Coinbase, and this was what year? This was 2021?
No, 2008, 2019, very early 2019. We were negotiating the acqui-hire or acquisition of our startup since like late 2018. It took a few months to close, but yeah, February 2019, I started at Coinbase. I worked there for 3 years until just about a year ago. Yeah.
Nice. And what was that experience like?
It was a great experience. So, I came to Coinbase with a mission to launch staking rewards. And I didn't really realize it at the time. I had a small team behind me, but I didn't realize at the time that it was going to be challenging, because I think I sort of imagined that, there's like a large engineering team at Coinbase so that they can build anything they want. But the reality is at Coinbase, you have these large teams working on, the retail exchange, working on Coinbase Pro. Those are the big money makers for Coinbase, is the exchange, right? But at the time, it was crypto winter in 2019. And I think there was a strong push from the board of directors and from the leadership team to build what they called non-market dependent revenue, meaning not being so reliant on trading fees, because trading fees are really high when there's a bull market. But when there's a bear market, trading fees kind of dry up.
Recession-proof business model.
Exactly. Recession-proof business model. And so staking was a big part of that, right? Is like, how do we build these passive income businesses? Like staking just generates 5 or 6% return every year, regardless of whether people are trading or not, right? And Coinbase will capture a 25% fee on that.
It's a great business to get into in bear markets, especially.
Yeah. And so there was a big push, but the challenge was that, there's still these like political divisions where the cash cows of the business. So if you think of like Google, for example, search is really their search and like G Suite and Gmail, right? Or their cash cows, right? So that's where all the revenue is generated, and they get the most resources in terms of developers and engineering resources. And so we were building a brand new business at Coinbase, which is, staking rewards. And there are a few other businesses like their custody business, which I was also a part of, where they charge a custody fee. So that's, again, non-market dependent revenue, where they can charge that fee every year, regardless of whether there's trading volume or not. And so there was a big push on that, but it was still really hard to get resources, because, it's just like starting a new project at Google. You're not going to get as many resources as the search team has, right? It's just the reality of things. But I was really proud of what we accomplished in just a short time. I think within, 3 to 6 months after I joined, we launched Tezos staking rewards. It was really fun to see, the animated product GIF hit Twitter, right? And it was one of the first. I remember our marketing, our VP of marketing, Rachel Horowitz, really amazing person. She was really pushing to have an animated GIF in the Twitter announcement for the product, because Coinbase hadn't done that in the past. So that was like our first big product launch, where we had an animated GIF that would show you how beautiful the product was and how you can use it.
Is there any
I had this product idea
between Rachel Horowitz and Ben Horowitz?
No, but I think Rachel works at Hahn Ventures now, so they're sort of Katie Hahn used to work at Andreessen A16Z, so there is I'm sure they know each other probably, but yeah.
I have this random connection with Brian and and kind of Ben Horowitz. I was just curious, but keep going with your story. Sorry.
Yeah, no worries. Yeah, and so it was really kind of exciting to be a part of that product launch. I had this idea that it's kind of boring when you stake, because you just basically deposit your crypto and then you just wait for a few months before you and then a month later you'll be like, oh cool, I earned $5 from my crypto staking rewards. But it's not very exciting. It's not like a sexy product, right?
What do you define as a sexy product? That is,
well,
like
it doesn't
launch, or like what do you mean by that?
Well, what I mean is, like, so it's kind of you have this. I mean, it's sexy because it earns money, right? But it's sort of like deposit your money in a savings account, right? You just deposit your money, and then it's like, okay, I've saved, yay, I've saved, and then you come back a few months or a year later, and you're like, oh, this is all the interest I earned in the last year. But it's not like a sexy product, like an iPhone or something, like getting a new phone.
Well, maybe, but maybe to an inexperienced investor or an inexperienced, that's what I would say. It's not sexy, but like, to me, knowing the ups and downs of a bull and bear cycle and like how dangerous it can be, right? How much money you can lose, that stability is like the sexiest thing to me in the world. Like, I mean that. After having lost millions myself, that's sexy to me. It's like, it's out of my hands. It just builds, it grows like naturally over time. I don't have to do anything. In my sleep, it's working. I mean, that literally is what passive income businesses and lifestyles are built off of, right? So I guess you're saying maybe internally, from like when you're playing with VC money, which is rocket fuel, it's not considered sexy because you're not making like, you're not taking down any servers or anything based off of product launches. Fine. Maybe from the Web3 perspective, it's not sexy, but I gotta say, maybe it's just we've been through enough cycles that to me, that is a 10 out of 10 sexy. But
so I had this idea for the product where, part of the thing is, like, you deposit your money or you deposit your crypto, and like you have no real, other than like the staking rewards you get on a regular basis, there's no real like dopamine response you're going to get from like other than the initial deposit. So the idea that I had was, what if we had this ticker in real time where you could actually watch like the dollar amount or the crypto amount of your balance, and you could see it go up. So like you could see pennies being earned every few minutes or every few seconds, and you could just watch that counter go up. And so the front end team actually built that into the front end, that like ticker, and it was just based on like what your rate of staking rewards were that you were earning over time. So it wasn't actually like magically your balance is increasing every microsecond, but it gave you the illusion that your balance was always increasing. So you could just come and watch it, and it was kind of like hypnotizing, right? Oh. You could see your number go up, right?
Yeah,
and that made it into the product. So like the animated GIF on the tweet had the little number going up, which was cool. I thought.
I think that's super cool. Like, I wish I would have studied computer science and got into this, but I remember back in the late 90s, there used to be these, like, you could download probably some malware on your computer, which would play ads in your background, and you'd earn money from those ads, right? I loved it. I love the fact that I might be making some passive income, because like the lifestyle where you make money in your sleep is like, to me, what everyone on Instagram and their Instagram reels and whatever, what do you call those people? Influencers are like essentially trying to demonstrate. And this is like the unsexy, simple passive income stream way of having a system almost run on its own, and have your money make money for you. These are all secrets that millionaires use. So like, you're calling it unsexy. I'm happy you did, because like I totally disagree with you. I think that is insane.
Yeah. Well, I guess I just mean it's not like a consumer product that's like super sexy, that like, the first time you use the iPhone, it's like this crazy moment where you're just like, oh, this is the future and everyone's going to have one of these, right? It's maybe not that, but But it was a lot of fun working with the team and building it. And also I think, it was a great experience because like working at Coinbase, the network of people you're exposed to that have all these really interesting and diverse backgrounds in crypto for various projects, is pretty amazing. And I really treasure those relationships and value that time that I spent there. Because like that was a big part of my experience there, is just sort of building my personal network, like meeting other people that had similar interests, that were into crypto. I was always the weird guy on my team at Amazon that would talk about Bitcoin a lot or talk about Ethereum a lot. And everyone's like, oh, Luke's talking about crypto again, right? Like, you know how it goes sometimes.
Yeah, of course. I mean, that was me too. Like, no one cares until all of a sudden some news comes out about China or like, and it's all just fun. And so like, we're like the spokespeople early on at our companies talking about it. No one else cared, it is.
Yeah.
I hear you completely. How come that didn't affect you? Why did you not let that get to you in any capacity? Because like, the support system that you have around you is really important. And like, if at work, maybe because you had your projects after work, like that you were working on with your brother, that kind of kept you motivated and excited about it. But like, how did you not let that affect you? Just kind of random. Well, I think because I got in really early to the extent that, Vitalik crashed on my couch in 2015, but I don't know, my parents have a bit of a traditional background and not everyone knew about Bitcoin, right? Early on. So like, how do you stay at the cusp of the bleeding edge when everyone around you, when, the average of the 5 voices around you may not be super enthusiastic or encouraging?
Well, I think that's a really good question. For me, I didn't make crypto into my full-time career until 2018, right? So I was always working in tech for most of my career up until then. So I always kind of had the job security of being an engineer to kind of fall back on, right? In the sense that like, I wasn't taking any huge risks going to work for AWS. Amazon was a very well-established company. And like, it was kind of a no-brainer that, yeah, why, of course not. Why not go work at AWS, right? And so I'd never really taken any risks in my career yet. But going to work at Coinbase was a bit of a risk because it was a startup and they were not, they had not gone public yet, right? And so there was that, risk that perhaps I would work there for a while and it would never work out, and we would just, crypto would die or something, and we would all just go home and get new jobs or something, right? Yeah. But what gave me confidence in it was that, number one, I knew that like I'd been in crypto for a while, and well, I will say like in the early days, it wasn't that big of a focus for me. It was just a hobby, right? Mining Bitcoin and Ethereum. And it was also, I was making 50 cents a day. It wasn't like I was making life-changing income, right? At the time, right? Like
losing money based off the amount you're paying for power, right?
I was basically break even with electricity. Yeah. And so this was kind of a cool thing. I'm like, I can leave my computer on overnight. It'll earn half a Bitcoin, which it was like worth 50 cents. And it'll cost me like, 40 cents worth of electricity or something. I did the math on my electric bill. At first I was just selling them because, and I actually did the online ads thing in the early 2000s, I think that you did. This is before there was too much malware. I remember doing that and getting like a $20 check in the mail for like a month of clicking on ads. Yeah. I think that was kind of cool. And I remember in the early days, it was similar. I like sold, I think I remember selling like $20 worth of Bitcoin on some sketchy exchange like Mt. Gox or something, right? Yeah. And then at the time I remember selling it and then just being like, oh, that's cool, but like, why? Why bother? Maybe I should just hold on to these things and see if they're worth something someday. So then I just held on to them and just did the HODL thing for years, which turned out pretty well for me. But yeah, I think in the early, just being in crypto, knowing there's cycles, you see these cycles where it was worth $1 and it went up to like $30 and then it like crashed back down to $1. And then you go through a few of those. But one thing I noticed is that every time, you go into a new bull cycle, you always have higher highs. And every time you go into a new bear cycle, you never hit the same lows. Like the low in the bear cycle is now like the high of the previous bull cycle.
That's so true.
And so I started to notice these cycles, that it just comes in waves. And so by the time I was working at Coinbase and we hit like the 2019 crypto winter, and I remember the time because we had these funny signs that someone had printed personally and put it up in the office, and it was like this meme from Game of Thrones where the like winter is coming, but it was like the crypto meme of crypto winter is coming, and like we never published this publicly because it was like violating Game of Thrones intellectual property or something, right? But we had these signs in the office, and we were all joking about crypto winter is coming or whatever, but we kind of, those of us that have been in it for a while, had the confidence that like, hey, this is just another one of those cycles, and like we'll recover from that, right? And crypto will come back. And the other thing I was thinking about is that I thought about how Coinbase missed the opportunity in 2017 during the hype of ICO mania when Bitcoin hit $20,000 for the first time. They totally missed the boat on going public, because that would have been a great time for Coinbase to go public. It's like right when Bitcoin was hitting 10K and like hitting all new all-time highs, right? They would have done amazingly well in the public stock market going public at that time. But obviously they probably didn't want to go public during a bear market. And so the calculus I made in my head was that like, hey, by signing up for this and getting a whole bunch of like Coinbase options, I'm pretty confident they're going to do their best to make sure they don't miss another bull market. So a few years from now, they're probably going to go public, and that'll be like a great opportunity. If you're very forward thinking, you're willing to, work hard for a few years and kind of take that risk. I mean, I was still making a good salary, so it wasn't like I was taking a huge risk. I could go work at Amazon again if I needed to. But just, understanding that the market will recover, there will be a bull market again. And that, my calculus was that Coinbase is going to do their best to go public. And they did, in 2021. And so that actually worked out pretty well for me. So, but it's just having that confidence. And I think it's the same thing today. Like you look at FTX collapsing, you look at Celsius, 3AC, all of these failures, Genesis, all these failures that we've seen over the last, 6 to 9 months. And there are people out there that I know that just joined crypto like a month or a year ago, or a few months or a year ago, that are like, I don't think this is the right industry for me. I don't think it'll be around tomorrow. I'm going to leave, right? Maybe FTX was a huge blow, a huge loss of confidence to them. But for those of us that have been around for many cycles, we just know that like, yeah, there are bad companies in this space, and there are a lot of scammers out there, but there are a lot of scammers in every space in tech, and they'll go away, but crypto will continue, right? The market will continue, and we'll see new bull market with even higher highs than we've ever seen before. So to me, that's not really something I question, but I can understand why people that are relatively new to crypto might question that.
How have you built? Experience is one thing, right? I understand that, having gone through multiple cycles, because it just flashed right now for me that in early 2018, kind of the peak of Ethereum was about 1,400, I remember, right? And that's that's literally the floor now for it, right? I don't think it's gone below that. Maybe it did touch a little bit underneath it at some point during the cycle, right? But that's generally the range. So that's through experience. But where did you build this inner conviction and inner confidence to just kind of have this risk-taking appetite? Is it just because you happen to be in the Bay Area, or no? I think you're from Utah originally, right?
Yeah, I mean, I lived on the East Coast for like 15 years before I moved to the Bay Area.
East Coast is not. I'm from the East Coast. I'm telling you, I'm from Boston.
Yeah,
that is not a place that has a high risk tolerance at all. How do you?
So I mean, it's a good question. When I took the job at Amazon, I was working in the New York office, and then they relocated me to the Bay Area so I could be closer to Apple to work with them. But I think, I mean, in New York, it's different. Most of the people you're working with are like finance background, right? And a few large like media companies like New York Times and others, right? Those are the type of customers that are like big Amazon customers. But on the West Coast, it's all like tech, right? And startups, which is a great experience. I really enjoyed it. But I think, I mean, like, how do you get comfortable taking those risks? And like, I guess I've always sort of questioned authority. And so like Bitcoin as a alternative monetary system really appealed to me, in the sense that like, I mean, I had researched like, hey, why is the Federal Reserve, deflating the money supply or inflating the money supply so much that like, a dollar is worth like pennies. A dollar from 100 years ago is worth like pennies compared to what it was back then, right?
I'll name it. The dollar is a shit coin.
Yeah, exactly. And so I think just having that background really made me question things. at a like fundamental level. And I think this probably comes from my dad in some ways, because my dad was actually a really interesting person who worked on Wall Street, and actually in the 70s, like during the oil crisis, where there was like stagflation, he got a bunch of investors together and like they all bought a whole bunch of gold at like $100 an ounce that went up to $400 an ounce. And there was like, this is during the late 70s, early 80s. And I think probably just learning how like, hey, inflation can be a really scary thing. I think at the time we had like 17 or 18% inflation, and like people were losing their purchasing power.
Hyperinflation. You remember that? I mean, I've only heard about it.
I was like a baby at the time, so I don't really remember very much. But I mean, I remember, I think probably just growing up and learning about how the Fed operates, learning about how the banking system operates. These are not things that these are not the kind of conversations that most parents have with their children, right?
No, I mean, not at all.
And so I think just having that exposure made me really interested in like alternative money and things like Bitcoin in the first place. Then I realized, also just growing up and going through the financial crisis. I mean, like those of us that kind of started our career, like I started my career during the dot-com crash. So I had the experience of being, unemployed for 15 months and like having to find new work. And I also had the experience of the 2008 financial crisis too. Like, I think those of us that have grown up in this generation just don't have a lot of trust in institutions, right? The institutions that are supposed to save us are just like, seem like they're destroying the financial system or whatever. And so that made me, really open to these like alternative forms of like finance.
I want to go a little deeper. What made you so anti-authoritarian? Like, was it something in your childhood with your parents? Because I've also been that way, just to name it, right? Like, if someone tells me something is not possible, I'll prove that it can be done. This is why I majored in chemistry, despite the fact that I don't have an analytical mind at all. I was a freshman. My brother was a senior in college, and he told me, or he was a senior in high school, and he told me that succeeding in AP chemistry was impossible. And to me, it just became this challenge. I ended up like doing pretty well in chemistry. I got like a 780 on the SAT2, all the way up through like, studying in college, graduating with the top 10 university in chemistry. And I hate chemistry. I hate it's just something I fell into because like I was told that it wasn't possible. I wanted to prove that it could be done, So like just from a young age, I don't know if that's even the best analogy, but like from a young age, I've always been much more turned on when I hear that something is impossible or that it can't be done. Do you have any like insight into what made you have that anti-authoritarian perspective? Was it just towards systems, or was it kind of birthed younger in age?
That's a great question, and it's super interesting about your chemistry experience and stuff. It sounds like you're actually pretty good at it, though. So
And
there must have been some ability there as well.
A little bit,
an aptitude for it.
Yeah, but and I give my dad a lot of credit also. He really helped me stay focused. My parents like helped me, give me that like structure that I really needed. So, I wouldn't have been there without them either.
Awesome.
Gotta give that up.
Yeah. I mean, I grew up in a very religious house, like, very like conservative Christian environment. Most of the people that I lived with or lived in my town were like, conservative Republicans. I think in general, I started to question religion at a very young age because I started to research more and I was reading a ton. And so I started to read the history of like the Mormon religion and Christianity in general. And I kind of realized that I'm like, wow, this is just all made up by humans. This is not like the word of God or anything. And so I started to really question religion and become like more of a skeptic, if you will. And that led me to rebel a lot against that, right? And so I was very rebellious in my youth. And yeah, it was just, so sort of questioning authority and rebelling against authority. And also, I think in many ways, like, that also, psychedelics and things like that came in when I was in college. And I think that just further opened my mind and made me question, the reality around us, right? And start to realize that you can actually change the reality of the world around you through effort and, energy. And so that was really kind of interesting to me, is that like, I realized that, the shared reality we all have as to like the way the universe is, the way the world operates, that we operate in is basically just created by humans that in many ways are maybe not even as smart as we are, right? All the things you see around you, the furniture, the houses you live in, the apartments you live in, the cars you drive, the transportation you take, all of these systems are created by humans that are like fallible, and we can change them if we want to. And that was sort of like this eye-opening experience where I realized that, like, if you don't like the life you're living in, or if you don't like the the friends you have, the relationships you have, or the job you work at, or the people around you, or all these things, even the very systems of like finance and money and things like that can be changed by people. You can change the universe if you want to. And that was really kind of eye-opening to me. Like, I learned that at a young age, like when I was in college. So
that's fascinating. I mean, to have that experience at a college level, again, that's not something you read in a book. That's not something you learned through a class. It's just something you experienced by putting yourself out there. I get that. And I'm guessing you have a pretty good memory too, because like it's easy to almost index. I mean, for you, I think you have that ability to index that experience and kind of go back to it anytime you need to, when things may not go your way or when you're not in a situation that you're happy with, right? So you can always be like, wait, I am in control here, right? And that you have that agency. And so like, that's really empowering to hear.
Thanks. Yeah. And I think in general, that's something that I've always kind of known. I mean, I came from a pretty humble background, like my family was very poor. I think we were living on, welfare and food stamps when I was young. So we didn't have a lot of the advantages that a lot of people do growing up. Like there was no chance for me to really attend an Ivy League school, or to, we wouldn't have had the funding to do it. And so like, I didn't have a lot of those things, but what I did have that was really incredible was access to computers at a very young age. When I was, in Provo, Utah, that's like the headquarters of Novell. And so when I was like in high school and stuff, they donated a computer lab to our school. So we were one of the few high schools that had like a full computer lab. And this is not like, today where everyone has like a tablet or a laptop or something in school, right? And I just filled my days with programming, right? And it was just really fun for me. And so just having access and that exposure. And I remember at the time though, what was kind of challenging though was at the time in the like mid 90s, people did not think that like technology was a career path, right?
Yeah.
Outside of maybe Silicon Valley or something like that, right? But the
agree.
rest of the world, like in India, I could imagine in the 90s or the early 2000s, people didn't realize you could be a successful software engineer, right? And now they do, right?
I loved building and breaking things. And my dad's an accountant. And in the 90s, we happened to have a computer, right? My dad was pretty forward thinking. He was down to like use Amazon back when it was just for like buying books and putting our credit card, online. So he had a good risk tolerance. One day he came home and I was taking computer apart and putting it back together, because that's just how I learned how things are made and built. And I remember him like yelling at me, and I was like a pretty sensitive kid as well. So he probably wasn't like, there's no domestic abuse or anything there. He was just really strict. And he was just like, what are you doing? And he was afraid because his taxes were, all of his tax documents, everything as an accountant, CPA, that's, I don't know, it's like the Bible, right? That's information he has to have. So I remember getting spooked out of it. And then when I was thinking about like, potentially taking a career in it, just because I enjoyed spending time on the computer, I was building websites like back in the 90s where you can click drag and drop buttons. And I remember him discouraging me to taking that career path because like there wasn't a clear career path. And a lot of the people who came here, working for Digital, I don't know if you remember that company, Digital.
Yep.
And
Digital Equipment Corp. Yeah,
exactly. Out of Nashville, New Hampshire, a lot of my aunts and uncles worked there, and I think maybe a few of them got laid off even. So he was right, like from what he knew, that it wasn't like a career path. So that kind of dissuaded me from studying a little bit more. And so I don't know if I ever would have been the best like person for writing code in general, because I don't think in that logical mindset, but it was always something that I liked. It's like easy dopamine releases where you kind of build something and it's responsive to you, right? So it's kind of like a way to communicate with an inanimate object. And so I agree with you that there wasn't much of a mindset back then that this could be a career path, before the iPhone had launched. And even at that time, no one had personal computers. Everybody just had desktops.
Yeah, exactly. And so this was sort of, this is before like Windows and graphical operating systems, right? And I remember being in high school and just like, programming computer, I'd be on the computer like 8 or 9 o'clock at night. And my mom would be like, you're wasting your time on that computer. You're never going to amount to anything. Why are you playing so many games? Because like I used to play video games too, right?
Yeah.
I wasn't always programming. Why are you playing so many games? You're wasting your time. You're not going to make a career out of that. Why don't you go, become a doctor or a lawyer or something, right? Like that's kind of the traditional career path. Your parents always want you to be like a doctor or a lawyer or some high paying job. But I kind of knew that this was going to be something big, like even though at the time, very few people had personal computers at home, right? It wasn't until like, I think Windows 95 came out and then people started getting like computers and then they had dial-up modems, right? But I was like a few years before that, I remember running a BBS, like a bulletin board system. And I actually had a second phone line installed in my parents' house. So I could so I could actually, receive calls on my modem.
Wait,
and that was a big formative experience too. I actually had to pay out of pocket. I had a job at the time. I was working like a fast food restaurant or something. And I paid out of pocket for like the $20 a month for the phone line or something. And I remember going to college and I got like a student loan for a few $1,000s and I built my own PC. Like I just bought all the parts and built it. And I was like, I'm going to build a monster PC, like get the best of everything. And that was what I spent my student loan on. But like at the time my family thought I was crazy. They're just like, you're not going to really amount to anything. You're not going to make a career out of this. It wasn't very obvious that you could make a career as like a software engineer or something. You just have to think of what the future will be like, right? What will the future be like? It'll probably be highly connected and software is going to eat the world, right? And I kind of thought that at the time, but I didn't, it was not mainstream.
I got to ask, it's what, 2023 right now. What will the future look like for crypto once all the incentives have kind of dried up and the inflation's all dried up? Like, what's going to be the next iteration of crypto that'll make it enter into the mainstream? Yeah,
I mean, I think in general, it's sort of challenging to kind of envision what crypto will be like, because I think it generally just is going to absorb the financial system, the traditional financial system, because if you think of like the different technology waves that have happened in like finance, before they had like giant mainframes back in like the 60s or something. And then they went to like Unix servers and then, Linux. And then, eventually now they're like going to cloud. But I do think this is one of those technology shifts where the back end for most banks and large financial institutions like the JP Morgans of the world, the Morgan Stanleys, they will probably replace their existing like banking backends with systems that look a lot like Web3, like decentralized systems that have less trust, that are more transparent, where you can actually see all of the loans that your counterparty might have, right? So you can kind of see the risk. It's more transparent.
Really bold to say, because like, just think of all the money that's laundered legally through JP Morgan for all the drug money in South America. Like, you really think that, what's their incentive to do that? Like,
well, I think the incentive is just that it's better in the sense that you don't have to trust as many third parties, right? So let's say you're JP Morgan and you're giving out a loan to like some other financial institution, right? Because I think banks lend to each other all the time, right? Well, what if you could just actually look at their financials and know that they're a trustworthy counterparty, they're not going to default on your loan, versus the system we're in today, which is like, trust us, bro. We have, here's an audit from our accounting firm, but they're the same accounting firm that audited FTX's books, right? So,
like there's a lot of alpha in that, right? Like even
yeah,
I highly doubt that'll go up to the Fed level, because the Fed hasn't been audited ever. I'm pretty sure. This is what got me passionate about Bitcoin. So that's kind of why, like, maybe some of the middle banks might have open systems, but I would be very surprised if the Fed ever were to be transparent with what they're actually doing.
Well, it would be really interesting. There's one thing that might happen there. So I know that at MIT, they're currently working on this central bank digital currency initiative. I forget what they call it, but you could just call it FedCoin or something, right? So, and I know this would be like a centralized blockchain as opposed to, decentralized network. It'd probably be like some kind of proof of authority system. But if they ever launch that and it allows you to view account balances and all of the transactions like Ethereum does today, then that would definitely be a step towards transparency. It's not that the Fed would be auditing themselves, but people could independently maybe audit the movements of the Fed in a way that they can't today or have greater transparency. Now, there's a lot of steps between here and then and that future, but also I'm not super thrilled with central bank digital currencies in the first place because I think they give censorship control to governments, which I'm not really thrilled about them having, although I kind of understand it's necessary for things like anti-money laundering and, sanctioning North Korea and things like that. Like you need a way to sort of prevent those transactions from happening. But yeah, like FedCoin could be a thing that gives us greater visibility into the financial system, right?
It could be, but do you really think, think about how nationalistic all the countries are becoming globally, right? Right now, that's just the wave.
Yeah.
I almost think that if I'm thinking from the lens of the United States government, absolutely not. Like, I would not want the books to be open. I do not want more transparency. I do not want a more democratic process for how decisions are made, because there are authoritarian countries that can get an edge by moving more rapidly, by not having, you think of even the way that DAOs are operating now, right? A lot of them need to have central decision-making before they can even have a somewhat decentralized nature, right? So I may be talking about two different things here. One is decentralization, one is like open books. But in general, where do you think that friction, like where's that line?
Well, I kind of hope that it isn't some government-backed centralized digital currency that we arrive on. That, like, I hope it's more of a private enterprise, like a Circle or someone like USD Coin, right? My hope is that it's a private thing as opposed to a government-led thing, because I do think that if it's some centralized government-issued digital currency, it's likely to either have be very centralized and have none of the like censorship-resistant characteristics that we really like about Bitcoin and Ethereum, and also it's likely to maybe put the US at a competitive disadvantage versus the rest of the world, because we might lock ourselves into like this, restricted monetary system. I can see China doing that as well, right? Like China is probably going to have some kind of centralized digital currency or CBDC, central bank digital currency, that will allow them complete control over all of their citizens' like financial transactions. And they kind of already have that. If you look at apps like WeChat or whatever, right, where they can, it's like the everything app. You can buy food, groceries, you can, buy movie tickets. Everything you want to do is in this one app. And if you ever end up on the wrong side of the government, they just like block your access to that, and you have no ability to transact financially with other people in society. That's a huge concern. But I think I'm hoping it's more of a private solution, like the industry creates it as opposed to governments create it. And I'm hoping it's more global in scale and not necessarily like US centric. And I mean, it could be pegged to the dollar or something, since that seems like a reasonably safe peg. But I'm just hoping it isn't like a complete US centric thing that only the US uses and other countries don't really use.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think this is a nice segue. What do you think your role is in getting to that future?
I mean, I think this is why, decentralized lending is so interesting to me personally, is number one, it gives individual people the same tools that the most wealthy people in the world have access to right now. So if you look at the way that the wealthy, the Elon Musks of the world, the billionaires manage their finances, they don't actually, sell their stock very often. I think Elon Musk sold some Tesla shares, right? But in general, Bill Gates doesn't really sell much Microsoft. What they do is they borrow against their equity, their stocks, right? And by borrowing and then buying houses and things like that, whatever they want to in the real world, they don't have to pay taxes because it's borrowed money. Now, if they sell their stock, they will pay taxes on it eventually, but that's, decades in the future. And maybe they'll pass it down to their children. There's all kinds of ways they could avoid it. But I think in general, having the tools that only the wealthiest in society have access to, democratizing that, making them accessible to everyone, no matter what their net worth is, or no matter how much they have in their bank account, I think is really desirable. This gives people the flexibility to say, like, invest in Bitcoin with the view that Bitcoin might be worth more tomorrow than it is today, and be able to borrow against that to pay bills or buy a house or something without, having to, give half their money to the government. And I think that is really empowering, and that really inspires me on a daily basis to sort of build what I'm building at Moonwell and contribute to Moonwell, because I think giving people that ability is really important. I mean, like, imagine if you don't have that ability to borrow against your equity. Like, most people don't have the ability to do that. You have to be pretty high net worth before your stockbroker will allow you to do that. But imagine the world you live in, where the guy that makes, that works a blue collar job makes, $20,000, $30,000 a year, buys stocks or crypto as to save his money. And then if he ever wants to take profits, he has to, pay half to the IRS and, just kills his savings, versus the guy that's, a multimillionaire and is able to just borrow and doesn't have to pay any taxes on his borrowed money. Like, the difference in financial outcomes is stark. Like, over a lifetime, the wealthiest people just become more and more wealthy versus the rest of the people that are paying all these high fees and taxes, right? And so if you look at our, it's really a regressive system of taxation, right? It's like penalizing the people that are the poorest in the world and giving people that are the wealthiest in the world this huge benefit. But by democratizing that, I think it levels the playing field and gives everyone access to financial tools to actually manage their finances in a reasonable way, to be able to borrow against anything they have, whether it's, their savings or whether it's, their real world property. That would be a really amazing thing to offer to people in the world. These are the kind of things that are really empowering, but it's going to take time to build all that, but I'm pretty excited about that future.
I hear you completely. I have to ask this because we're both in crypto, we're both drinking the punch. I think of my family members, my brother, my mom, my dad, and even exes and friends from the past, right? Who I got into Celsius. What differentiates Moonwell from Celsius? And would you ever go towards a non-custodial route?
Well, the thing that you should know, and I think this is a great question because it's a very easy answer, is that we actually don't have access to your funds. Moonwell is non-custodial. So I think these are the things that I think about in terms of, this is why I'm really inspired by Web3 in general, is it shifts this, like, don't be evil, stance that Web2, that Google popularized, right? The don't be evil, which is basically like, trust us, bro, to can't be evil. And if you set things up properly, and like, there's some caveats there, but let me give you an example. You can look at the Moonwell contracts, the smart contracts. You can look at the audits and those contracts. And if you understand the code, and if you trust the auditing firms that we've had audit them, then you can be relatively confident there are no smart contract bugs that are going to cause you to lose funds. So that's one. So you can see the open source contracts that have been audited, and that there are hopefully no bugs in there that would allow you to steal code or steal funds, right? No bugs in the code. And then number two, you can look at the fact that the protocol is controlled through governance, and that there is no admin key that, like, anyone on our team or any of the other Moonwell contributors has, right? So Lunar Labs, the company that I founded, is just one of the many companies that contributes to Moonwell, the protocol. And so by turning over admin to the governance, to on-chain governance, that basically means that we would have to get a super majority of votes to actually take money out of the protocol, right? So it increases the barrier to doing that. And it would take at least 4 days, to move through the governance process. And the community would be aware that someone was trying to put up a government proposal that would steal funds. So it would be very obvious. And so you've shifted the governance from a, like, multi-sig or some type of admin key that some projects have, over to full decentralized governance. And then that governance is also the only thing that can upgrade the protocol to add new features. Those all have to be voted on through governance. So I think that can give you the confidence that any contributing team to Moonwell can't just steal your funds. And then the third thing is just having that visibility and transparency on chain where you can actually see that all the funds are there at all times, right? And by being using uncollateralized loan or over collateralized loans, sorry, you can see that there's not like more money lent out than exists in the first place, right? And so I think those three things, the transparency, on-chain governance where we don't have admin keys, and the audits on the smart contracts, those three things together can give you greater confidence in Web3 protocols and DeFi protocols in general. And I think Moonwell is a good example of that. Like we've really tried hard we did a progressive decentralization where in the early days, we had a multi-sig that was the admin of the protocol. But I think in August that was turned over to the governance contract.
Yeah, that's pretty fascinating. I appreciate you sharing that because I learned yesterday, and correct me if I'm wrong here, right? You're much more well-established in the Polkadot ecosystem. You understand the code, that governance proposals within the governance palette within Polkadot, it almost makes it so that if a governance vote is passed, then it automatically gets applied, right? It has to be applied. Whereas within the Ethereum ecosystem, governance occurs more as like a meme, where you can figure out what the general public sentiment is towards a specific action or vote or proposal, but it doesn't hard code the result of it. Is that accurate?
Yeah, I think that's pretty accurate in the sense that the Ethereum roadmap for upgrades and things like, there's a Shanghai hard fork coming up in March, right? Which will add the ability to do staking withdrawals. So in Ethereum, that roadmap is basically set by the Ethereum Foundation. And there's a whole bunch of different, software development teams that are contributing code for various features like staking and things like that. And roughly that all kind of rolls up under Vitalik, basically. And, he does have to get consensus from the community about upgrades. So, but it's a very loose and not very formalized process, right? There's a ton of research that goes into Ethereum improvement proposals, EIPs, and the community generally has to sort of like come together and agree before they become reality. But it's not this formalized governance process where it's done fully on chain, which I think gives Polkadot an advantage in terms of on-chain governance. It does increase the friction. There's like a downside to it in the sense that it can increase the friction because you have to actually go through on-chain governance to make changes and improvements versus, having, people just make changes and improvements. But I think in general, it gives, a better story there because that's the other thing you want to look at. I think besides those three things I mentioned earlier is the layer one ecosystem you're operating on, how decentralized is that? Because that can basically change all your assumptions about, for example, there could be an upgrade that basically allows people to steal funds out of all the smart contracts on the chain, right? So if there's a bad upgrade or, even if it's not malicious, if it's just a bug that's introduced, could cause loss of funds.
That's true. That's interesting insight. I almost feel like this is a nice segue into like maybe ending the podcast now and saving some for another day. Anything else you wanted to add to this?
Not off the top of my head. It's been really great chatting with you, Munjal, and having this conversation. It's fun. I know we talked about a ton of diverse topics. It's been a really great experience, and thank you for listening to part of my life story.
Thanks, man. Really appreciate having you.
Absolutely.